the author of The Price of Principle and Get Trump, is going to be joining us here in just a second. Alan Dershowitz. You know, I'm looking at what the media is saying now, as opposed to what they were saying about Joe Biden, and it just keeps ever changing. Can we play that clip? We played it in the news report at the top of the first hour. I think it was from MSNBC, where they were, incredibly just dismissing everything that has been brought up about Joe Biden, and now saying it's because his son died and he was very upset and he wasn't paying attention. Listen to this.
Let's put this in context. Beau Biden got very sick in early 2015. He died in the spring of 2015, which was right in the middle when Devon Archer had his business dealings with Hunter Biden. At that point, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden began to speak every day because they were both devastated by Beau's death. They spoke every day. The witness testified that over his 10-year relationship with Hunter Biden, there may be approximately 20 times when in one of those conversations, Hunter Biden would put his father at a dinner, not at a business meeting, at a dinner that he was having if he happened to get a hold of his father, and would ask his father to say hello to whoever was at the table. And that was essentially the extent of it. It was unclear, and the witness testified, this is not me saying that, the witness testified that a lot of times, most of the time, Joe didn't even know who the people were at the dinner table.
Most of the time. Oh, that's great, because there's never been a meeting at a dinner before. I mean, that's literally never occurred. No one has ever been able to do business while eating at a table. Like, this has never been something attempted by anyone in business.
No, of course not. Of course not. And it's only, look, I'm very broken up about my brother. You can understand that.
Yep.
I'm very broken up about my brother, but I'm in an emergency meeting with Burisma. And they're telling me they need assurances that my dad will stop Victor Shokin from investigating Burisma, or we're done. Isn't this what we're paying for? This, quote, illusion of power from your father. And then he says, let me get him on the phone. He calls him, and then a week later, shockingly, for no apparent reason, he gets Shokin fired by withholding money in foreign aid from the United States government. But that was, he just left the room for just a second, to grieve with his dad. This is unbelievable what they're expecting you to buy into. Alan Dershowitz is with us. He is, of course, the author of Get Trump and The Price of Principle, and host of The Dersh Show. Alan Dershowitz joins us now. We would love to understand, Alan, what exactly is Donald Trump being charged with in this latest indictment?
The basic charge is that he personally knew he had lost the election. He believed that he had actually lost the election fair and square, and he engaged in all these actions with a corrupt motive. I don't think the government's going to be able to prove that. There is no...
First of all, let me tell you something. I talked to Donald Trump probably about 2 weeks before January 6th. There is no way he believed he lost that election. There's still, today, he does not believe he lost that election. I can guarantee it. You know him well enough to know that.
He believes he won the election, and he believes it was stolen from him. I think he's wrong. Many people told him he was wrong. Many people are quoted in the indictment telling him he was wrong, but that doesn't make the crime. The crime requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he himself actually knew and believed it and acted with a corrupt motive. I don't think the government's going to be able to prove that. But to state a broader point, when the Attorney General of the United States authorizes an indictment, as was done here, against the man running against the incumbent president, who is now tied 44-44 in the New York Times poll, That indictment better be the strongest indictment in American history. There should be a smoking gun, fingerprints, a videotape, and a confession. This document is so flawed, is so filled with speculation. Jack Smith's famous for bringing speculative cases and then being smacked down by appellate courts. This just doesn't satisfy the Banana Republic test. In banana republics, presidents prosecute their political opponents. And the stronger their political opponents are in the polls, the more likely they are to be prosecuted. And we don't want that to happen in the United States. And I think this indictment doesn't meet what I call the Nixon standard. The Nixon standard is Nixon's crimes were so obvious that even his political supporters favored his being impeached or being prosecuted. That's not the case here. Right now, the only people who seem to support this indictment are partisans who are anti-Trump, and that's just not enough to heal the divisions in this country. So this indictment will further the divisions, and especially if it's ultimately reversed on appeal. Look, the indictment is brought in the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia jury will convict anybody named Trump for anything, and that's why the case should be moved to Virginia. It will be subject to a motion to change the venue to Virginia, where you have a level playing field. It's a purple state. This case should be tried in a purple state, not in a bright, a Democratic state. And that's where it's being tried, in the most Democratic district in the United States of America, the most anti-Trump district in the entire United States. That's where the trial is scheduled to be held by a judge who has a very questionable background. She worked for years for a firm that's highly questionable, the David Boies firm, very Democratic-oriented. They represented Hunter
She was
Biden.
working, right, and Burisma, and she was working there at the time of all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Not saying that she was
David
involved in
Boies-
it, but...
Right. David Boies and his firm have been charged with more cases of corruption and disbarable conduct than any law firm in modern American history. And it's well known for its being subject to so many charges. And she was part of that firm. And that's not something I would brag about. I got that firm disqualified in a case because of the conflict of interest. And they've been charged over and over again with conflicts and other kinds of things. And she spent most of her career in that firm. So if I'm Donald Trump, I don't want to be tried in front of her. I want to be tried in front of a judge who has a fairer and better background, and I want to be tried in front of a jury that isn't 90-something% anti-Trump voters.
Can he get that done?
He can try, and if he loses, it will be subject to appeal. And that might be the kind of thing that could be appealed immediately as well. There's some dispute about that.
Right.
But change of venue motions can sometimes be subject to what are called interlocutory appeals. So there's a lot that will happen before he stands trial in the District of Columbia in front of this judge.
This judge also is the January 6th hanging judge. There hasn't been a single case that has come before her that she hasn't given tougher sentences than even the government was asking for.
Well, I mean, you need to have, in this case, when you're trying the man who's running against the incumbent president, it has to be Caesar's wife. It has to be clearer and cleaner than anything. And having the trial in the District of Columbia in front of this judge on the basis of an indictment of this kind is going to just sow greater divisions in this country. People are not going to be satisfied that this is fair, objective justice. You know, the Bible, the Torah, says, lo takir panim, to judges, don't recognize faces. Don't do justice based on who the person is. Do justice based on the law and the facts. And the law and the facts don't support this indictment.
I don't know how you feel about Jonathan Turley. I generally like him because he's kind of like the Constitution. He doesn't always fall my way. And so he said yesterday that this is the first criminal indictment of alleged disinformation. If you take a red pin to all the material presumptively protected by the First Amendment, you can reduce much of the indictment to haiku. I felt the Mar-a-Lago indictment was strong. This is the inverse. In fact, it's unfair at points. It quotes Trump in his speech about encouraging people to go to the Capitol, but like the January 6th committee, it omits where he says you should go peacefully. I'd like to get your comments on that in 60 seconds with Alan Dershowitz, the author of Get Trump. So what do you think about the first case, as Jonathan Turley says, making disinformation a crime?
No, I think he's right. I think this really changes the nature of American politics. And if it were taken to its logical conclusion, half of Congress would be in prison. You can't make it a crime to lie to the American public. Lying has been part of American politics since, Thomas Jefferson ran against John Adams. And the cure for lying is the other side tell the truth and you win the election. But the First Amendment protects lies. The First Amendment protects so much speech that we despise. Look, I've defended communists, Nazis, pornographers, not because I like any of them, but because I like free speech and because the alternative is a system of censorship. And this indictment takes us down the road toward criminalizing free speech. And, what is true and what is not true is often in the eye of the beholder, particularly in the political context. Remember, Chief Justice Rehnquist, a conservative Chief Justice, said the First Amendment doesn't recognize a false opinion. False opinions and true opinions have the same status under the First Amendment. And this is a case criminalizing a false opinions, what people believe are false opinions. What I believe is a false opinion. I think that President Biden won the election fair and square. I wish there hadn't been some of the Russia dossier stuff and some of the stuff involving social media. But the election count itself was, I think, fair. Was there some fraud? Yeah. Were there some constitutional problems? Yeah. Pennsylvania violated Article 2 of the Constitution, in my opinion. But it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election. But Donald Trump has the right to protest and to be wrong in his protests. And that's what the deepest problem is here.
Can you go into this a bit, Alan? Because I know the founders, they fought over freedom of speech, and especially when the Sedition Act was imposed.
Right.
They went back and forth, and they said the government cannot ever be the arbiter of truth. It can't be because sometimes they're lying. And if they're the only ones that can say, nope, this is true, this is not, which they did in COVID and everything else, it is an unworkable society. It eventually kills all free speech. Can you kind of explain that in layman's terms to people?
Yeah. Well, the 1800 election, one of the great elections in history, was really about this. John Adams, and believe it or not, even George Washington had supported and Alexander Hamilton supported the Alien and Sedition Acts, which punished opinions that were contrary to the opinions of the government. People actually went to prison. Thomas Jefferson ran against that, and he overwhelmingly beat John Adams, who was a great man and a great president. But Americans wanted free speech, and Jefferson then pardoned the people who were convicted under the Alien and Sedition Act. And from then on, I think the First Amendment has been interpreted very, very broadly, which doesn't always serve the interests of the American public immediately. It means that you do allow adult pornography, you do allow communist speech and Nazi speech and hate speech and anti-Semitic speech and anti-Catholic speech and anti-Christian and anti-Muslim speech. All of that is permitted. Look what happened in Sweden the other day. They burnt a Torah. They actually set it on fire. They burnt a Torah. And that would be permitted in the United States if it's your Torah or your Quran. Now, in Sweden, they're trying to pass a law now prohibiting the burning of religious books, and maybe that will pass. But under our First Amendment, we have extraordinarily broad rights to do the wrong thing. And now
Yes.
President Trump is being indicted for doing what this administration thinks was the wrong thing. I agree. I think he did the wrong thing. But he did say when he made his January 6th speech, which I thoroughly disapprove of, he did say he wants people to protest peacefully and patriotically. And when you leave that out, that's as much of a lie as anything that Donald Trump was accused of.
It's called a lie of omission. Alan, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I don't
Thank
know
you.
where all of this ends, but I appreciate your guidance on this. Thank you so much. Alan Dershowitz.
Sure.
So I want to just quickly go over this timeline one more time. June 7th, FBI releases the documents to Congress alleging Biden's took a $10 million bribe. The very next day, June 8th, Jack Smith indicts Trump in the Mar-a-Lago docks case. The 26th of July, Hunter Biden goes to court and rejects the sweetheart plea deal after it was revealed DOJ tried to give him blanket immunity from all prosecutions in the future. The very next day, Jack Smith adds more charges for Trump in the Mar-a-Lago case. July 31st, this week, Hunter Biden, former business partner, testifies that Joe Biden was in on 20 phone calls with his son's business partners and that Burisma executives pressured them to fire the prosecutor. The very next day, Jack Smith indicts Trump again for January 6th. This is a curious at best pattern. Is our president involved in the weaponization of our government as a cover-up? Exactly what Nixon left office for.